Hey, y'all. Welcome to Simple Conversations. This is KJ.
Hey, and it's Alice. So pause us for a minute, grab you something to drink, come back, sit down, and be a part of this conversation.
Because we have a lot to say. Welcome to Simple Conversations. So, y'all, listen, this is our disclaimer. We're not here to give you any advice or tell you how to live your life.
Well, maybe just a little.
We're still trying to figure this thing out ourselves. Thanks for tuning in. Hey, y'all. Welcome back to Simple Conversations where grace meets strength. Hey, Alice.
Hey, KJ, how are you today?
Really good. Happy Monday.
Happy Monday.
Yes. It is June 2021 for listeners. We don't know when you're listening to this. Of course, it'll still be good no matter when you listen to it, but just for reference. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. How's it going?
It's good. I'm on summer vacation already. I love it.
Oh, that's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
I love that.
Yep. So I'm keeping my little grands twice a week. And today I had my adoptive neighbor grandchildren. That's what we call them. They're like, we adopted them as our grandchildren too. They're older and they came over to help with the littles so I could work in the yard, and they all played outside so well together this morning. I got a whole flower bed weeded and about 6 flower pots planted.
That's lovely.
While they just played. Oh, and the chickens, and they got to play with the baby chickens. So they loved every minute of it.
That's awesome.
I'm tired now, though.
Hey, girl.
Work is hard work.
It is, but look, you better get it together because we got a lot more to say.
Okay, I'm ready. I can talk. I just don't want to get down on my knees anymore.
No, this is not that kind of podcast.
No, it's not. Okay. So
listeners.
We had really good responses and great questions sent to us about the last 2 podcasts that we made. And we just felt like there was more to the conversation.
A lot more.
Yeah. And so we just want to talk more. And so listeners, this will be episode 3 of Why I Left the Church But Not Jesus. And so KJ, get us started.
Well, first of all, I want to start with a disclaimer that in episode 1 and 2, that you and I talked about instances, not just that have happened to us or that we have experienced, that those were instances of collective stories. And some of them, yes, we experienced firsthand, but not all of them were our personal stories.
Right.
So, and there'll be more of that today. So, we're going to discuss again, stories that people have shared with us, as well as things that we have seen in the news. And of course, listeners, we will always give credit to things that we've seen in the news, but we don't really think that it's right to call out names and give credit to the personal stories that people have shared. So, and we'll always list the things that we've seen in the news, where we've got some of our research, some of our topics in the show notes down below. So I just want to start off with something that I heard yesterday that was extremely profound to me. So on Sundays, I usually tune into Elevation Church out of Charlotte, North Carolina, Pastor Stephen Furtick. My husband and I both enjoy the music. The message is always relative. And so we really have been getting spiritually fed from Elevation Church. Yesterday, the stand-in pastor, Robert Madu, we love him too. We've listened into him a lot, and I shouldn't say a lot, several times. Yesterday's message was incredible, but one thing, and it spoke to our heart, both of ours. But one thing he said yesterday that just really, I had to write it down, was religion takes something that is simple and complicates it. And it's so true, right? And I think that really is the basis of what you and I have been discussing in this series, is that that church has become and so complicated that it's sometimes just not even enjoyable.
Oh,
And
for
so it's not where, it's not, yeah, because it becomes so complicated.
yeah.
And so we're not telling you to leave your church. What I hope for you or for the listeners is that some of these stories that or these experiences that we've shared with you, um, hopefully you have more grace for that at your church.
Wow, I hope so.
Yeah,
I hope that when people listen, they're like, I don't have any idea what y'all are talking about. I've never experienced that in my life. I hope you say that. I hope
yeah,
you honestly
yeah,
say every bit of that.
yeah,
I really do.
yeah, yeah. I do too. I do too.
Mm.
So, and again, I think it's very interesting when I hear stories that I think, "Oh my goodness, really?"
Mhm.
So, so and again, like this story that I'm about to share, like, I don't know what the answer is. Like,
Right.
I don't know how to help someone that's listening that could be a secretary at a church that's responsible for what I'm about to share.
Okay.
So I know a lady who was a member of a church her whole life. So when the church started, it was small, and her and her whole family, I mean, she raised her family in that church. But when they needed a bigger church, her family did everything they could to help build this church. So much so that, like, there were bricks in this church that had their names engraved in it.
Right.
Okay. So I would assume that bricks and pavers from the patios, things, the little plaque in front of the flag, all of that, means that they have financially
Mhm.
supported this church, um, in a big way. Okay.
Right. Right.
So the church grows and grows, and this lady is there every time the doors are open. We know people like that.
We do.
I've been made to, my grandmother
I
made me go
I
every.
I have been that person.
Yeah, right. And
Yeah.
so when she becomes elderly and she's no longer able to physically attend church, they're still cashing her checks, but she's not being spiritually fed because they don't have it on TV. They're still cashing her checks, but she hadn't heard anything from the church in 6 years. But
Wow.
they're still cashing her check. And she feels resentment because she's still doing what she's promised to do, which is financially so into this church. And yet she hasn't heard anybody from the church and heard from anyone in the church for 6 years. And then when she passes away, they want to be paid for the family to use some of the facilities.
Wow. For her funeral?
And yeah,
Wow.
yeah. So again, I don't know what the answer is,
I know the
but
answer.
these are the very reasons why people are.
I have a few answers for that, actually. I could tell you a few answers.
Whose responsibility is for that? Is the responsibility, does that fall on the person who opens the envelope? Does that responsibility fall on the accountant, the person who's counting the money? Does that responsibility fall on the leader? See, when I say that I don't have an answer for that, like, I don't know, but yet on the
I
other hand,
But I think when we're supposed to be doing life together, if you get so big that you don't know the people you're doing life with and nobody knows, that's a problem. So the fact that this fell through the cracks So who was pastoring her at this point when she was not able to attend anymore in physical body? Like, who was calling her on the phone, or who was sending her? Like my grandmother, they used to send her when in the nursing home when she no longer attended her church. She still supported it, and they still sent her the large print adult Sunday school book every single quarter that they came out with them. Her church sent that to her. She was in a nursing home for 10 years. They never were not faithful to her.
Uh-huh.
The pastor still came to visit her, and she had not attended the church in, gosh, hit or miss since my granddaddy passed away. And I was in my young 20s when my granddaddy passed away. So you're talking over the last 30 years, she would have been hit or miss, and the last 10, hardly at all. Like, well, not at all, not at all. But they were faithful to her. They sent her a Christmas card every year. They would come and visit her in the nursing home, 2 different towns. Yeah. So, okay, so the fact that this woman, one, was still financially supporting, I wish I would known her to say, honey, you don't have to keep doing that, because you sow seed where you're being fed, unless the Lord leads you to sow seed. And then if he's leading you to sow seed, then don't begrudge it, because it won't return to you void. Like, God will use it, okay, for your faithfulness. He'll honor that. But yeah, like, what in the world? Like, so no one was pastoring her. No one was checking on her. No one was making sure that she was okay. So there has to be where we somehow compare our money to our attendance. Like that has to be somebody's responsibility to see when people are missing that are members of the body, where they are.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. All of that bothers me.
All of that.
Yeah. Every bit of that. And that you would have the audacity to ask that family to pay when that woman paid for 6 years of not attending. Wow. Yeah. It's stories like that.
Yeah.
Stories like that. That's why I do church at home too. That's why. Because I can't trust the people who are making those decisions, because they don't make decisions based on the best interest of the people.
Right.
And I'm sure
Yeah.
there are some. I'm sure there are some.
Yeah.
Um,
Absolutely.
I'm sure some of those places exist. Actually, I haven't found one yet, but I am sure. I'm sure they exist. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I'm impressed that that your grandma's church was faithful to her.
They
Really,
were. They really
really,
were. Um,
really.
in fact, for years, even after she went in the nursing home, there was a group of ladies who I remember when I was like a little girl and would go to church with her, who sang, and they would come, and when they would come and visit her, and it was sporadic. It might just be a few times a year. But again, you're talking different towns and, et cetera, et cetera. But they would still come, and they would sing with her and for her. And oh yeah, it was a really big deal. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very, very, very interesting. Very. Yeah, speaking of that too, then I have a client who she was a member of a church for years and years and years, and then the nephew became the leader of the church, and because he didn't visit people at the hospital and visit homes, she quit going. There was a lady in the church that was in the hospital and never saw the pastor, and that turned her off. And I even tried to tell her, well, I mean, a lot of pastors nowadays, that if they're not pastoring large churches, like mega churches, they have to have jobs, real jobs. And so, can you mix? She said, oh no, I mean, the church should be your job. The church should be your job. Well, I mean,
Yeah, I think the pastors really make better pastors when the church is not your job. I personally think. What does that look like when you have sick people in the hospital? I don't think that it's the pastor's job to go
I
see a
don't either.
sick person.
I don't either.
but somebody should reach out in some capacity, whether that's a phone call or, or a visit or whatever. Like, they want to be cared for. Are they part of a small group? Then let the small group do it. Are they part of a Sunday school class that's a tight group? Then let those people do it. But I think that responsibility falls on the body to do those things as much as any leader. Again, if we're doing life together, then if you go to the hospital, KJ, I'm not going to wait for some pastor to go visit you and come back and tell me how you're doing, because you're my friend and I'm going to go see you myself to see how you're doing. I'm going to call you, we're going to make a meal, like, yeah. So I think we have forgotten the do life together part.
Yeah, absolutely. Although I will say, I was looking up generations earlier, and so she would be from the silent generation. And so she would be accustomed to like a patriarchal church where, we do what he says, because whatever he says is the gospel and it's the truth, and we follow him no matter what. And so that's very interesting too, when you think about the silent generation and the church, because my grandparents were from the silent generation. And honestly, it was so true. Like, I don't even know why we couldn't play Go Fish with a stack of cards.
Oh, because you couldn't play cards, because cards would send you straight to hell. Yeah, we couldn't play cards.
Straight to hell.
Yeah, one time Ronita, my older sister, she had a deck of cards on the way to church on a Sunday morning, and she was just playing in her lap. And oh my goodness, I think Grandma and Granddad turned the car around. I think so. But look, when they would go to church, and now I loved my Grandma and Granddaddy's church. It really is where my foundation of faith came from, was, through my grandmother. But when they used to go to the altar to pray, men were on one side of the altar and women were on the other. They didn't pray together. Even husbands and wives didn't pray together. All the women prayed on the right side and the men were praying on the left side. They didn't intermingle at all.
What's up with that?
I don't know. Interesting, right?
Very interesting. And it could be, was that like a religious rule of that particular church, or was it just something where one Sunday a man went on one side, another woman went on the other side, and everybody followed suit, and people just—
I don't know. I wasn't in that church. Like, I didn't grow up there. Like, I probably wouldn't have gone there. Let me see, when my parents split, I was just turning 12. So I wouldn't have gone to that church consistently past the age of 11. So when I would have been possibly asking questions about things, I wasn't there to, I wasn't a part of it to ask. And I actually never thought to ask Grandmama why we did it that way. We were part of a very religious denomination, because like the ladies didn't cut their hair. They all wore their hair pinned up. No one had their ears pierced. Women didn't wear makeup. I never saw my grandmama in a pair of breeches. She had a pair of breeches that she would sometimes wear in the garden, only because she was allergic to everything under the sun. But I never saw her in breeches.
What denomination was that?
Pentecostal holiness.
See, I never saw my sweet granny in breeches either until very, very late on in life. And yeah, I grew up Southern Baptist.
You know what else too is funny? Grandmama would wear a watch, and she would wear a mother's pin, but she never wore a wedding ring, because there was something about wearing jewelry. But she could wear a watch. Bizarre things. She could wear a watch, and she could wear a mother's pin, or different like types of pins, like, in the neck of her dress or whatever. And on her sweater, like, she could wear a mother's pin, but no wedding rings, no jewelry. Definitely couldn't have no earbobs, because earbobs would—
oh my, no,
came back like that. Would
put some holes in your ears? Are you kidding me? Mess up what God gave you? Are you kidding me?
Yeah, I used to tease her when I used to do her nails and her feet when she was in the nursing home. I used to tease her that I was going to paint her nails red.
Oh,
No, she would laugh at me because she knew I was teasing. Yeah, we would have a good time.
That's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So I will say that during this process of just thinking about these episodes of this series of podcasts that we're doing, like I've really been listening and reading a lot of stuff, and so the Jude 3 project, Why I Don't Go, is really an excellent. It's short videos, like
Okay.
5 to 8 minutes, but that it really has um, you know what? It makes me feel validated.
Okay.
Okay. That I'm not being dramatic, that I'm not
Or petty.
operating
Or
it
petty. I'm not
or
being
petty
petty.
or
Right.
petty
Right.
or here go my air quotes, that I'm not
Uh-huh.
operating in the spirit of offense.
You don't have a spirit of Jezebel either, do you? Right? You don't have the Jezebel spirit.
I mean, I don't think so.
Oh my goodness.
Anyway, but I think one thing that I think the biggest thing that the Jude 3 project that I was able to take away is that there will never be change until we call it out and expose it,
Mm-hmm.
and until our questions are actually um until we're able to ask our questions,
Yeah.
right? We, look, you could say I don't know, but let me come with my question, because see, God's big enough for all of that.
Right.
Right? And so, yeah. And then to know that, that he's, I don't know, just call it out, expose it. And then and to know that anything that I have experienced from my perspective is valid, like because a leader or a deacon or whatever, because he has no context for that, he hasn't experienced it, doesn't make it not so, doesn't make me operating in the spirit of offense.
Correct.
Yeah.
Right.
So speaking of deacons, like that's one thing I don't really understand either, is all the titles in
Right.
church, and so I've never really understood that. Never really understood why you go to some churches and like all of the men are sitting on the altar like in these big ornate chairs, like they're the big Pumbaa. I don't really I don't get that. But just recently I heard a story where for years and years they weren't allowing women to be deacons in the church.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so
And I think that depends on the denomination too, but yes, correct.
okay. I think this is a Baptist church that I'm
Okay.
speaking of. This story came from a lady who attends a Baptist church. And so she had been doing all of the women stuff in church,
Mm-hmm.
all the women stuff,
Mm-hmm.
organizing the kitchen,
Because that's a woman's job.
right, teaching children's church,
Because that's a woman's job.
because that's
The nursery, that's a woman's
yeah,
job.
leading the team, whatever, acting, puppets, whatever it was, I can't remember.
Uh,
It's so she becomes a deacon. She's one of very few in her church, and then her husband and she go through something, and now all of a sudden, like, you can't be a deacon anymore because you and your husband are going through something. And that's just the wrong thing to portray, because we have this perfect museum in this church, and if you don't measure up to that perfection, that standard of perfection, then we're going to have to demote you, for lack of a better word. When
I
she
wonder
told me
how
that,
many men were deacons that had marriages had been through something and they remained deacons. Because I have a story about that when you're finished. I'll tell you about that.
well, I mean, yeah, that's like, I'm dumbfounded.
Did she
Excuse me.
did she stay at the church?
She went back to the church, but she came away from the church for probably more than a year. And I'll be real honest with you. I think that the only reason why she went back to the church was because it was more convenient than any other church. She'd have to drive further to get to another church. I'm not really sure. And that's none of my business. I don't even know why I said that, but yeah, she's still at that church. And
So
she's gone back to doing all the women things.
I don't love that. It doesn't help any other woman by her doing that. Okay, so not deacon, but pastor's council. So some denominations have a council of 12 or 13 people that sit on a council. I remember when it was all men and the whole like state level, international level, whatever, was voting to see if they were going to allow women to be a part of this board of people. So I'm, to the best of my knowledge, and I don't love the politics, so my husband actually would probably explain it way better. So if somebody needs clarification, you can message us. The pastor's council would be the advisory counseling board when they're making decisions. They would discuss these decisions with the pastor, and they would be the ones who would then give their advice on these things, whether it's building fund or hiring people or, I don't know, changing the name. I don't know, any of those kinds of whatever things that they would make decisions on. So this council had one woman and the rest were men. And when it came up for a vote and you could nominate someone or put your name in, I knew of a woman who put her name in. She had been recently divorced, and was told that it was not a good time for her to put her name in because she was recently divorced and she needed time to work through all of that first. While on that board sat two men that I know clearly was not a secret, that one had been divorced and he and his wife were separated at the time, and another man who he and his wife never slept together ever. They were only together for the sake of not getting a divorce. They didn't even sit together in the church, but it was okay for them to remain on the council. But this woman who had gone through a divorce could not be a part of it because she had just gone through a divorce.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yep. Yep.
So I heard a story about a minister in a Episcopalian church
Okay.
who became involved with one of the parishioners, and they got married. They were older. They were both in their 60s. Okay. And they got married. And for some reason, about 3 years later, he didn't want to be married to her anymore. And he had grown up in that church, and his family had like a trust for that church. Like they were very wealthy. And so when they were no longer together, the priest, like the high priest of that church, told her they were transferring her. And so he basically had her removed from her church where she had been a leader, and the leader of the church, her leader, her superior, allowed money to take precedent over her job and where she felt like God had called her to be.
Over family.
And
Yeah.
she really felt as if she could still do her job in that position, but they wouldn't even let her try. Like they took her off the schedule. She wasn't allowed to do anything, and they transferred her out. Well, guess what?
The woman. That's what I want to know. Why is it always the woman?
Yeah, she's left the church.
Wow.
So, yeah. Which leads us into the one of the biggest mega churches.
Mm-hmm.
Can I speak their name?
Yeah.
Hillsong,
Mm-hmm.
who has had some of the most controversial articles about people leaving their church. Okay, which leads me into the story about Hillsong and about how they turned their back on one of their prominent leaders when he was having some junk going on in his life.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of like taking him out of the pulpit and saying, listen, we're going to help you. We're going to help you, and we're going to like lock arms with you while
Walk
you and
through the
your
process.
family,
Right.
yes, go through this healing process.
Right.
But instead, they ousted him from his position and ousted the family. So now he's married and has children. And so those children have lost their church.
Mm-hmm.
His wife has lost their church. That was
Mm-hmm.
their church.
Yeah,
That
and that was
wasn't
their
just,
family. Mm-hmm.
yeah, yeah,
He did a lot of good work in New York.
absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, he did.
And not to condone at all what he did, he had an affair. Um,
Yes, he had an affair and he
uh,
got caught.
right.
Would he still be having it today if he hadn't got caught? I don't know. It's not none of my business, but I still feel like the church turned their back on him. They turned their back on him and his family at the time when he needed it most.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah.
I don't understand that, Alice.
Yeah, I
What,
don't either.
where is Jesus in that? Where is Jesus? That's my only question. Where is Jesus in that?
Yeah, I can't answer that one. You know, we listened to Perry Noble, who has a church in South Carolina, and he used to be part of a church called New Spring, which I'm pretty sure is part of that whole Southern Baptist convention. We'll get to those. We're going to get to them in this podcast. But back in, how long has it been? Gosh, I don't know what year it was. We went to Universal on vacation, and I remember getting the news from a friend that Perry had written a letter. So Pastor Perry, people call him Pastor P, had written a letter, and he was had been asked to resign his position as the head of the church. I'm guessing that would have been 2014, 15, maybe 16, but I don't know if 16 is right, but 15 or 16, maybe right in there. He had been asked to resign his position. He had an alcohol addiction. It had become quite a problem. When he was asked to leave his position, he ended up going to an in-person treatment facility for like 9 months on the other side of the country. But they took everything from him. And it was very public. It was very humiliating. And I remember telling my friend that day, I said, you know what? He's going to come back, and this is going to be one of the greatest stories of redemption, because God is a redeeming God.
Yes.
So after treatment, he lost his marriage in this process, which he does not ever talk about from the pulpit. He never talks about he never did talk about his wife. He still doesn't talk about any of that. He only talks about his viewpoint of it. And he started a consulting business. And then God called him to open another church. And he was like, he said he argued with God for a long time because he never wanted to do that again. He never wanted to be in that position again. He did start another church, and it's called Second Chance Church. And he has since remarried. He's a little raw. I like his preaching because Perry's been through a lot of stuff and he's not afraid to talk about it. And he's not afraid to talk about anxiety and depression and addictions. And he talks about them for what they are. Like, they're very real problems that people suffer. And it doesn't make you less of a person to have a struggle.
Yeah.
I love that.
And that's relative to people.
It is. It matters.
So
People need
relative.
to know that other people struggle too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's very important to be transparent when you're a leader.
And he was during his time at New Spring too. He wrote a book during that time about depression, and he talked about it. And I remember hearing him do sermons. He was not my favorite pastor at that point because I felt like he was a little more raw in the sense of he's not a person with a great deal of empathy or mercy. Okay, so he comes across what I would say maybe a little more brash or a little more direct than my personal preference. Just because I'm tenderhearted and I like for everybody to, hold hands and sing Kumbaya. But he talked about it then, and he talked about how one Easter service, how he like felt so attacked, like he was having suicidal thoughts in the pulpit on an Easter Sunday. And like he talked about it. I think it made people very uncomfortable for him to talk about it. Because you can't put that in a nice, tidy little box. Like you can't.
Yeah.
And people are very uncomfortable. It's the same thing that we deal with now with sexual assault and with, racism in the church. Like, you can't put it in a pretty little box, so people aren't comfortable with it, and they'd just rather not talk about it. Let's just don't talk about it. Let's just put it over there in the corner where it belongs, and let's don't talk about it. As long as we don't talk about it and we don't address it, we won't never fix it.
Right. That's so true.
Yeah.
It's so true.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is the same thing about mental health. I think it's very important that regardless of whether a leader has had those issues, like, you just don't put them in a box,
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah. So one of the people that I love and who has totally been sorry for our listeners, there is a dog outside walking, and so my puppy doesn't love it that there's a dog outside. He wants to go outside and see this dog. Okay, so Beth Moore is one that has totally caught all kinds of heck for her stand on leaving the Southern Baptist Convention, which is a big deal for her to do that. So did you hear about that as well?
I did.
Okay.
But I don't know a whole lot about it.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know a whole lot about it. So you tell me everything that
so
you know.
I'll take this stuff out of an article and I'll link it. It's from Christianity Today.
Okay.
And this article is from March of 21.
Okay.
Okay. So that it starts off by saying, for nearly 3 decades, Beth Moore has been the very model of a modern Southern Baptist. Okay, so she started off, which I didn't know until I read this article, but how she got started. She actually was a Sunday school teacher, and let me see if I can find that part in here. In the 1980s, she began sharing devotions during an aerobics class that she taught at First Baptist Church in Houston. And she then began teaching a popular women's Bible study at the church, which eventually attracted thousands each week. In the 90s, she wrote a Bible study manuscript and sent it to Lifeway, then known as the Baptist Sunday School Board, where it was rejected. However, after a Lifeway staffer saw Moore teach in person, the publisher changed their mind. So her first study was A Woman's Heart, God's Dwelling Place, and it was published in 1995. Well, she then went on from 95 and wrote lots of Bible studies, and her organization grew tremendously. So she had always been a part of the Southern Baptist Church. In fact, she would tell you that was her safe place, because her home was not a safe place, because she, like many women we know in those religious big settings, Joyce Meyer would be another one of them, were sexually assaulted in their own home. Mm-hmm. And she is one that, too, was sexually assaulted. And all was well until in October of 2016, Beth Moore had what she called the shock of my life when reading the transcripts of the Access Hollywood tapes where Trump boasted of his sexual exploits with women. She said this wasn't just immorality, this smacked of sexual assault. So when she began speaking out against the sexual assault and also of the assault that was taking place to women within the church, the Southern Baptist Convention got very uncomfortable with her speaking out. So she wrote a letter in 2018, Letter to My Brothers, on her blog, outlining her concerns about the deference she was expected to show male leaders, going as far as wearing flats instead of heels when she was serving alongside a man who was shorter than she was.
What?
Yeah. Okay, side note, I was a part of a church where the pastor was such an uppity, I say pastor with such lightness because he did not have a pastor's heart. Sorry, y'all. He just did not. That if the youth pastor showed up and the pastor was not wearing a tie, the youth pastor couldn't wear a tie because he couldn't be dressed more than the pastor. He would have to take his tie off.
Stop.
Not kidding. I'm not even kidding. Yep. Okay, let's go back to Beth Moore. Okay, so then she started talking about experiences with her own abuse. And after February 2019, she read a report in the Houston Chronicle that detailed more than 700 cases of sexual abuse among Southern Baptists over a 20-year period. So her social feeds, and especially Twitter, where she has nearly 1 million followers, became filled with righteous anger and dismay over what she saw as a toxic mix of misogyny, nationalism, and partisan politics taking over the evangelical world she loved, along with good-natured banter with friends and supporters to encourage them. So she spoke out. The mistake she made was a friend of hers in 2019 mentioned that a female was going to be preaching on Mother's Day. And Beth replied to her, this happened on Twitter, I'm doing Mother's Day too, Vicki. Let's please don't tell anyone this. And I guess that was done in jest. And the tweet immediately sparked a national debate among Southern Baptists and other evangelical leaders over whether a woman should be allowed to preach in church. Now, at this point, Beth Moore has sold millions and millions of copies of her Bible studies. She spends hundreds of hours of study and preparation in each one. She knows the word. Oh my goodness. And we're not sure if it's okay if she give a message from the pulpit on a Sunday because it's a Sunday. Oh, help me, Lord. Okay. And so then this is a quote from Albert Moeller Jr., the president of the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. He said this on his podcast. There's just something about the order of creation that means that God intends for the preaching voice to be a male voice. And then John MacArthur, who is a California mega preacher, summed up his thoughts and told Beth Moore to go home. So that happened I read that article when it came out. So that happened in like a business meeting that was taking place at the Southern Baptist Convention, where there was a panel of men on the stage and they were playing this ridiculous game. And one guy would say, I'll just call out a word and then y'all tell me whatever comes to mind first, right? And he said, Beth Moore, and that guy said, go home. Please tell me, in a room full of preachers, probably hundreds of preachers, first of all, what are you doing?
Yeah. You look like an ass.
Oh, gosh. Okay. Okay, so then this other person labeled her a threat, a liberal threat to the denomination. Georgia pastor Josh Bush, I don't know how to pronounce his last name. So after much agony, Beth Moore was working on her latest Bible study, which I'm doing this summer, by the way. It's the study of Galatians. I'm very excited about doing it. I actually chose it on purpose because of this event that took place and her walking away. She broke ties with Lifeway, who is run by the Southern Baptist Convention or owned by them or whatever, because they're
I didn't know that.
Yeah, they're all linked. They're all linked. So when the Southern Baptist Convention drops somebody, Lifeway also drops them. We'll get to that when we get to Jen Hatmaker. Okay, so when she started working on this Bible study with her daughter, she came across this this passage where Peter and Paul part ways, because Paul says to Peter that Peter's conduct was not in step with the gospel. And she said that phrase resonated with her so much. She said it was not in step with the gospel, and it felt like we had landed on Mars. And she was referring to the Southern Baptist denomination at that time. And so the different people go on and make comments about what a big deal this was for her to walk away. Butler, who is a University of Pennsylvania professor, said, I applaud this move and support her because I know how soul-crushing the Southern Baptist Convention is for women. She'll be better off without them doing the ministry God calls her to do, and so on. So Beth Moore walked away. She said, I am no longer a Southern Baptist. I'm still a Baptist, and she parted ways with them. So Lifeway said, our relationship with Beth is not over. We'll continue to love, support, pray, and support Beth for years to come. Lifeway is so thankful to the Lord for allowing us to be a small part of how God has used Beth over the years. So they will still carry her books. They will no longer edit and print them, I think, and no longer handle her live events that she does.
Interesting.
Yeah,
I didn't know that Lifeway was owned by Southern Baptist, which I mean,
and own might not be the right
okay,
word, but they're totally like linked.
okay,
Totally connected. Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
I stand corrected. Yeah. Okay. Wow.
Because there's some people that would call themselves a Christian author and Lifeway won't carry their work because they don't align with their values, I guess. Yeah.
I think it's so interesting, when we talk about being Baptist versus Southern Baptist.
Oh
Like,
gosh, I don't even know what the difference is. And then you
yeah.
have like there's a Free Baptist, right? And then there's Pentecostal Free Will Baptist. You have Free Will Baptist. Like there's so many, like I don't even know. Like I don't even like what makes them so different. I don't know. We'd have to like pull up their doctrine or beliefs. What is that called when you look up their statements of belief? Statements of belief. We'd have to look that up. And I don't know. I think dumb things happened way back in the day and caused people to split, because they didn't like stuff. And so they went their own way. And then I think that things that were the same, like probably would have aligned themselves very similarly, just popped up in different parts of the country too. Different denominations. Like where they originated was different, but their beliefs are pretty similar.
Oh, I see. Like Southern Baptist. So are there Northern Baptists?
I don't know.
Are there Eastern, Western,
I don't know.
Yeah.
And then you have too the oh, what was I gonna say? I don't know. It just slipped right out my ears.
Very, very interesting.
I don't love any of that though. I mean, look, Paul says in the New Testament that to God we are neither male nor female, Jew nor Gentile. Like none of that matters. None of that matters.
Right.
If you don't have a penis, you can't stand in the pulpit. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Probably
Ever.
not the dumbest, but it is dumb.
It's dumb.
Like, oh my gosh. I don't love it at all.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't. So good. I know it's over and you weren't finished listening. So stay tuned. There will be an episode 4 of Why I Left the Church, but Not Jesus. Who knows, there could be a 5, but for sure, there will be a 4. Thanks for listening. Hey, you guys, we just want to say thank you today. We want to thank our listeners and those of you that have subscribed to the Simple Conversations Friends. Thanks.
Hey y'all, this is KJ from Simple Conversations Where Grace Meets Strength. Thank y'all so much for listening and tuning in. If it weren't for y'all, there would be no reason for us to do this. Listen, we need your help. We need your support. So head on over to patreon.com/Simple Conversations and decide exactly how you want to be involved. For $5 a month, you would get access to behind the scenes content. For $25 a month, you would get that as well as a shout out on the podcast or fan input. As a supporter for $50 a month, you would get all that in the previous 2 tiers, as well as a one-time gift or book that Alice and I have read or are reading that we think would add value to your life. Or for $100 a month, we consider you family. You ever heard that before? That's friends that are so good that we consider you family. So you would get everything in the previous 3 tiers, as well as exclusive branded merchandise from Simple Conversations. So listen.